Where do people, in general, no pointing, where do they tend to go wrong with creative goals?
I think setting goals that are too big is definitely one that, especially if in the moment you're getting so much dopamine from this task and focus that you assume you will always have. I almost as a default now add 50% to every first instinct deadline I set myself, where I'm like, that's not going to happen. Or I overestimate how long the increments will take to do. Either way is fine. That is a big one. And again, being willing to change the timeline when you need to change the timeline is helpful. Something that I did before I got my ADHD diagnosis, I always wanted to write novels. That was kind of like the loose aspiration because it just felt like that's the big thing where you know you did it. Now you're a writer, you wrote a novel. Went to some creative writing courses, started writing short stories. Even short stories were very hard for me. Sometimes like maintaining motivation on one short story was very difficult. Finishing one was really difficult. And for a while, I like kind of dodged the feelings of shame around it and tried not to deal with it and was like, oh, well, like I have finished some short stories, but it never felt natural and it felt like it should be easy or whatever. And then I finally in like 2016, 17, I started a microfiction project where I was writing literally postcard-sized short stories, and my output went through the roof. And I sustained that output, and I had finally found a format where I could complete something with the attention span and excitement that I had, where I could drop an idea that was no longer motivating me through its novelty and pivot to another idea, but do so in the same scope. Because the next short story that would still fit on a postcard would exist in the same universe and ecosystem as part of the same project. And I got my ADHD diagnosis not having realized I had published 5 books, none of which have a storyline longer than 4 pages. Because I found out, like, to be motivated, I can finish a comic because a comic that I'm drawing is interesting and I can finish it within a certain time span. A short story that is 1 page, I can finish in that time span. And I was lucky enough to discover a format that when you do the short sprints, which I'm really good at, enough times in a row, you have enough content for something that is the shape and size of a novel. That's the only way that I ever published books, was that I enjoyed the short sprint activity. The increments, the measurable increments of progress were so satisfying in and of themselves that I could end up with enough of those to reach a long goal. There's kind of 2 lessons that I think are important there. Like, one is like not to force yourself to succeed in genres that may not be good for you. If you're finding like the genre is really hard, maybe there's some growth there, maybe you'll develop the skills, and that's awesome. Set yourself challenges. But also if you're finding that you're just trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, then look for, okay, how do I make this work for myself? My ideal thing I thought was a novel, but I was having trouble doing novels. So I said, okay, what's something down from a novel that works for me? A short story. Short stories were too hard for me. That is kind of embarrassing to admit, but short stories required too much attention span and focus. Next step down was like a postcard-sized short story. It felt so good. And because I could maintain motivation, I could reignite motivation by changing the topics and focuses and styles I was writing in. I could do something on that. And I think like the larger lesson there is that whatever brings you to your project and gets you to make progress, whatever version of the project lets you do that, is helping you with the attainable side of the goal. So maybe there's like the perfect chapter that you could write today if like you were at your very, very best. And maybe tomorrow you'll be in the conditions in your mind will be such that you could write that perfect chapter. But the imperfect chapter that you write today, or the imperfect progress that you can make today, weighs 1,000,000 times more than the nebulous dark matter theory of the perfect thing that you could make if everything just aligned. And like, this is not just about creative goals, this is about anything, right? Like, there's actually this really beautiful, it was an AMA, I think, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it was him talking about like, how do you maintain motivation? And he's like, if you can't go to the gym, go for a walk. If you can't go for a walk, stand up and sit down 5 times. Like, do the thing that you can do that gets you started on the thing. And the thing that you'll often find is that if you can just like do the thing for 5 minutes, you will almost every time trick yourself into starting it and getting into the process enough that now you're just doing it because you like it. Like, do it for 5 minutes when it's really uncomfortable. And if it's still uncomfortable, you're allowed to quit. But you'll probably find most of the time 5 minutes in and you've adjusted to the temperature of the bathwater and you're now comfortable. So
it's funny that you say that. Yesterday I was talking about writing goals. James Clear calls this the 2-minute rule. Like, do it for 2 minutes, see what happens. If you're still hating it at 2 minutes, that's fine. And that is a writing goal for me. I will sit down and set the timer for 2 minutes, and chances are I will be outraged that the timer is going off because I now want to write whatever it is that I started writing. And then I get, several hundred words written. But what that means is I have set myself such an easy goal. It is very difficult to fail. You need to remember this has to be a goal that you can do on your worst week. This has to be a goal you can do on your hardest day.
And the other thing that the rule that I have for myself is that like, whatever happened yesterday happened yesterday. Yesterday is not a prophecy for how today is going to go. Both on the days where it went really great, that can actually make the next day harder because you're like, well, if I don't do that, then I'm on a downward trajectory. All you have is today. If yesterday you failed really hard, that's also okay. It makes it so much easier to come back to habits that I've dropped. because historically I would drop a habit and then avoid it out of shame. There's no shame for dropped habits. There's only what we're doing today. And if today we come back to it, then that is a victory. So like, there are days where like I forgot to like wash my face in the morning. There are days I forgot to brush my teeth. It happens. Like there's like these check marks are so not perfect. I can't hit every priority every week, and like that it stays on the sheet. Next week we try again. So yeah, I fully think be as compassionate to yourself as you can. Set goals that you can't fail. And if you do fail the goal, next day is a reset. No debts. No debts. You show up and you do what you can do with that day.
You said something so important before, which was if I don't put something on my calendar, it doesn't happen. And I think one of the things that people often make an error in when they set creative goals is they say, I will write, I will prep for my session, but they never determine when. They never create a space in their life for this goal. They just hope it will magically happen. And I think being realistic about how much time you have, and also carving out time for a thing you have committed to, is so important.
So scheduling, like putting the time in some kind of calendar, I think is very, very important. And that doesn't need to be fancy. I've started working with an app that I pay, I think, $9 a month for. Won't work for everyone, but it's called Reclaim.ai. It is one of the good uses of AI, which is it's just a little automatic assistant that you put in all the tasks that you want to do, all the habits that you want to build. You can do things like, I want to do it roughly between these hours. This is a habit I'm comfortable dropping if I need to. Here are my deadlines for these projects. These are the ones that I can't drop. These are the ones that I can. And it'll basically build your schedule for you so that none of your deadlines are going to get missed. Or it'll tell you if like at this trajectory you won't hit a deadline. It'll flag that for you. And then it'll always schedule in like 2 hours of writing for me a week in between the other things that I have to do at certain times. I can schedule in calls. So that's helped me a lot for a few reasons. One is that it always puts it in the calendar. I don't have to reschedule writing every week. It always finds time for me every week for the habits that I want to build. Two is there's an executive function thing where what do I want to work on next? The moment I have to decide on a direction, already it's taking up a very limited resource. Like it's a spell slot that I don't have a lot of spell slots of. So and it just tells me the next 2 hours you're working on this thing. And it's great because I don't have to think about it. I don't have to use that extra energy deciding what to do. I can also just override it and do what I want, but it helps as a default for it to be, if you follow the plan that has been like laid out by the AI right now, you'll hit your goals. There are other versions of this same app too. I picked the one that ended up being cheapest because I'm cheap. And there are ones that are fancier and more expensive, but you don't need to have that. You can just literally have like writing is something Saturdays at 10 a.m. you always do. And if you schedule over it, then you move it to Sunday. Like they can be as easy as that. But one of the rules that I started having to figure out my tasks and prioritization for the day was like to start really thinking about my day as Dungeons and Dragons action economy. I can do one main action, I can do one bonus action, one reaction, and movement. And I can only do those things every turn. Maybe once in a moment I get an action surge as a class feature, but I can't do that reliably. And I've started planning my days as like, what is the one thing that I for sure know that I'm going to do, I need to do? That's my action. What is my bonus action? To me, the reaction is when I have a spark of like excitement or enjoyment, I get a little boost of bonus energy that I can sometimes do to slip another task in there. But like, I can only really usefully do maybe 2 big things in a day, or like 1 big thing and 1 medium thing. If I get more done, that's amazing. But like, do not plan on doing more. And
I do something similar. I think setting expectations is really important. And I think that people feeling like, oh, I have realistically 20 minutes a day to write at lunch. I will write 2,000 words a day in 20 minutes. No, you won't. No, you won't. Don't do that to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be realistic about the time that you do have. And you said something really important. You talked a couple of times about shame. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the big things that people go wrong with creative goals is if they miss one day, that's it. They're done. And it's no, that's not true. One day just means that you had one bad day. And that is okay. You are human. It may even mean that you need to build in more breaks into your schedule. That you cannot, for example, write every day. If you do find yourself missing 1 day a week, maybe you should only be writing 6 days a week.
I started time tracking, and like I realized that when I'm like really motivated on a project, I can do 10 and 12-hour days. I can reliably count on 6 hours a day, of which 4 hours are probably going to be really good, and 2 hours are going to have diminishing returns. And while I wish it could reliably do even an 8-hour workday, which feels like it should be standard because that's what a lot of other people do, I can really only reliably do what I can do. I was talking to a lawyer yesterday about like I was working so hard, and like I said a number of hours was probably his standard work week, and that for me was like my really hard week. And I had a moment of feeling like, oh, am I just like weak-minded or weak-willed? Even if that was true, wouldn't really matter. I've got what I've got. And if I'm not realistic about the capacities that I have, then I probably won't get anything done sustainably. So just kind of accept that we're where we're at and work with the tools that I have on hand.
And you know what? Different tasks take different numbers of spoons. Like
Yeah.
I can write all day, but ask me to do business admin and I have about an hour in me before I cry. I'm better at different things at different kinds of times of day.
Yeah.
Know your brain. Know what works for you.